Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford. All schools with students who could probably Venmo someone to have me killed. But even more impressive than how rich their students are is the size of these universities' endowments. Over the last few decades, the story of higher education's concentrated wealth has been told through the growth of endowment funds, many of which are larger than the GDPs of entire countries. And I'm not talking fake countries like Luxembourg. I mean real ones like Estonia, Honduras, and Iceland. Or Iceland is fake, but you get the point. And yet, as endowments have bulked up, the cost of attending these upper echelon universities has also gone bananas mode. It's time to investigate.
I've got a rebel soul. I've got a rebel soul.
Generally speaking, an endowment is a donation of money or property to a nonprofit organization, which then invests the endowment and uses the resulting investment income for a specific purpose. But to understand college endowments specifically, we should first refer to the American Council of Education, whose president suspiciously looks like a man I bumped into at a swingers party in Hoboken last night. It was a good time. Higher ed institutional endowments are defined as an aggregation of assets invested by a college or university to support its education and research mission in perpetuity. So it's basically a big investment account made up of charitable donations, money that a school uses to function today and well into the future. Sometimes these donations are made for a specific thing, like a new dining hall or professor's salary, and sometimes they're unrestricted gifts. People often think of an endowment as a humongous Santa Claus bag that colleges can reach into and make it rain whenever they want. But the reality is much more complicated than just a big sack.
We refer to it as an endowment, but it's generally a collection of hundreds or even thousands of smaller investment funds that are each endowed for different purposes.
That's Melissa Korn, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal who focuses on higher education. And I don't mean students smoking reefer at UC Boulder. I mean Princeton.
So to talk about the endowment spending is a lot more complicated than just writing one bigger check in a given year.
So instead of one big bag, endowments are more like a collection of fanny packs, each stuffed with an individual donation, sometimes given for a specific spending purpose. And while colleges, like the alma mater of Ted Kaczynski, have endowments of over $50 billion, it's not like that for everyone. In one survey of 678 academic institutions, 20% reported having endowments worth over $1 billion, but over 50% had endowments of less than $250 million.
Now, let's be clear, there are lots of institutions around the country that don't have substantial endowments and don't have this opportunity, but there are others that do.
Brian Galle is a professor at Georgetown University's Law Center who has previously written about the rising cost of college and how well endowed they are. And just like when you see a hot dad pushing a $5,000 stroller around West Village, whenever you look at these elite colleges, you wonder how they made all their money.
Because they've been collecting money for a really, really long time, and they have very sophisticated investment managers handling that money.
Thank you, Melissa. Your reporting allows us to dust off the rarely used good work formula for big swing and endowments. Pile of money plus sophisticated investment managers plus lots of time equals ginormous pile of money. Now, compared to everyone else, these top-tier schools have been rich for a long time. But it wasn't until the year 1985 that these endowments really kicked into high gear. That's the year a rootin' tootin' cowboy by the name of David Swenson swaggered into a little one-horse town called New Haven, Connecticut.
There's certainly a cult of personality that was around David Swenson. He was seen as just a fantastic, thoughtful, smart investor who was very successful in growing Yale's endowment.
In the 80s, Ivy League sex symbol David Swenson revolutionized endowment investing by coining what became known as the Yale model.
He really helped shift to these kind of higher return investments. So shifting away from kind of the more generic stocks and bonds stuff.
Today, that looks like investing in your usual house in Connecticut stuff, private equity, hedge funds, and real estate. And boy, did Swenson's model cook. When Swenson took over at Yale, the endowment was about $1 billion. When he died in 2021, it was about $31 billion. Shabooyah! No matter how good you Excel chimps think you are at your jobs, ain't none of you putting up wilt numbers like my boy D. Swizzle. In fact, the Swenson model was so successful that in the years since, other elite colleges have either basically copied Swenson's approach or hired his employees to help run their endowments.
Many people who worked for him have gone on to really successful careers at other investment arms of universities, so clearly something worked well.
The wealthiest 15 universities ended 2022 with an average endowment of over $21 billion. Higher education has so much money tied up into it, you'd think it was the pantaloons of Mr. Monopoly. All right, I'll do boob jokes. Yeah, okay, all right. But all of this money begs the question, why?
Economists say that the reason that an institution like a college should have an endowment is basically as a rainy day fund. If you have a sudden downturn in your revenues, your students all have to stay home because there's a pandemic, you still have to pay the rent and you have to pay the salaries of all the tenured faculty like me and so on.
So it is a good idea to have money saved in case the proverbial shit hits the proverbial fan. This is true for everybody, but especially colleges, who society relies on to crank out aimless 20-somethings like myself, regardless of the economic environment. And yet, during the pandemic, while rainy day endowment spending did help some schools weather the storm, some of the most loaded colleges still face salary freezes and staff cuts. But another reason why colleges need big stockpiles of money, in addition to unpredictable economic phenomenon, is the predictable economic phenomenon of inflation. I'm sorry, that's inflation.
The other thing that colleges and universities sometimes say is like their costs go up faster than inflation. So the argument that a university might offer is we're saving up money now because we're afraid that education costs are going to keep getting expensive in the future. So to make our tuition affordable in the future, we've got to put money away today.
And look, ask any one of my drinking pals from my Lehman days and they'll tell you, I'm all for stockpiling money. But watching Dartmouth stockpile billions of dollars for the future can be a tough pill to swallow for families who might need to shoulder the burden of higher tuition, even when there might be very good reason for schools to be financially prepared.
It's a tough question because I understand when you look at the returns over a long period of time, you look at inflation, you say if the school is really trying to be as much of a power in 100 years as it is now, yes, they need to keep earning and growing at this rate in order to just keep up with inflation, let alone anything else. But that's really hard to stomach when you see students struggling with debt, parents struggling with debt. There's a hardship for families while these schools are just sitting on this growing nest egg.
And finally, besides rainy day funds and preparing for inflation, there's one more reason why schools stockpile money that I think we can all agree with. Being rich is absolutely dope.
Rich and influential institutions generally are not that eager to give up their wealth and influence. And if you ask them, why are you so rich and influential, I think the question answers itself. It's because it's good to be rich and it's good to be influential.
Now you're speaking my language, Professor. Being rich buys you influence. You think the Heat called it FTX Arena because they liked hanging out with this guy? But in the world of higher education, being rich also buys you something else. Prestige.
Nonprofit educational institutions don't maximize either revenues or the number of students that they admit. They maximize prestige.
And as is demonstrated by yet another patented good work formula, nothing helps you maximize prestige like cold, rock-hard cash.
In the prestige battle, it's an arms race in the endowment world.
Catherine Liu is a writer and professor of film and media studies at UC Irvine, who's published extensively about the politics of class. She recently wrote a piece about the intimate relationship between universities and hedge funds.
What the endowment allows people to do is create an arms war of amenities. So you can build giant stadiums. You can have like this most state-of-the-art particle collider. You can use that endowment as a down payment on a giant building, on amenities that will make you more desirable, more prestigious, harder to get into.
Well, hot colleges, let's see those amenities. TikTok?
This is what it's like to live in the most beautiful dorm at Harvard. Yes, a fireplace with wall sconces.
Well, you can't look this good on the talk without a bulging wallet. It's numbers time. Since 1990, just a few years after David Swensen took over Yale's endowment, average tuition and fees at public four-year universities have nearly tripled after adjusting for inflation, and nearly doubled at private institutions. In 2022, the average tuition price at a U.S. private college was just under $40,000 a year, which is 4% higher than it was the previous year. $40,000, which if you quickly search on Craigslist, could get you a John Deere backhoe, a Steinway piano, or this adorable coffee shop in Brooklyn. Bet you feel dumb now, juniors at Emory. 3 years of tuition down the drain when you could have been living it up backhoe salon style. Instead, you're just hungover cheating on your communications homework. idiots. Tuition increases have culminated in a dramatic rise in student debt. But wait a minute, shouldn't these big ol' endowments we were talking about earlier help foot these tuition bills?
Colleges couldn't allocate more of their endowment towards tuition. There's no question about that. They could do that.
But that ain't really how the cookies crumble. According to a working paper by the National Bureau of Economic Research, wealthier colleges and universities only modestly increase the generosity of aid packages. Colleges and universities appear to use greater endowment wealth to increase spending and become more selective, resulting in higher institutional rankings. Which sounds bad, especially when you remember that these universities are nonprofit, so their endowments aren't taxable. However, schools will tell you that it's not as simple as just reallocating endowment spend towards financial aid. Like we said earlier, charitable gifts are given by donors for specific purposes. If I give Seton Hall $1 million to build the Dan Toomey naked statue of journalistic worship, I'd be pretty pissed if it went towards something stupid like free textbooks.
You've got a lot of money from very wealthy alums, business tycoons who say, I have this pet project, I have this passion, there's this research thing I want to fund, I want my money to go here. And if you don't put it there, I'm gonna pull the money.
But, like, come on, can't you just level with people? Can't you say, hey, Jason Momoa, we know you want us to build that underwater powerlifting temple in your honor, but what if we'd used your donation to help send a few more kids to school? Well, according to Melissa, in a perfect world, it's part of the job of development offices to work with donors and direct gifts towards the areas of greatest need.
If the development office of a university is doing its job, they are trying to bring in as much unrestricted money as possible, because that allows the school to spend the money in ways that they see fit.
Which is not to say that these elite schools aren't trying hard to make their educations more accessible.
The wealthiest universities have made a concerted effort to lower the cost for the neediest students. So they, even if they're only putting in, a small percent of their endowments toward financial aid, that's a small percent of billions of dollars.
Indeed, some elite schools like Princeton, Brown, and Cornell have virtually eliminated tuition for low-income students, an initiative these schools continue to pursue. In Princeton's budget for this year, they increased undergrad financial aid by 26%. Princeton is now free for most families who earn less than $100,000 a year. But even with steps like this, universities are still spending just a sliver of their endowments that continue to grow. And while others across the country struggle to meet the price of higher education, it makes a newsboy like me wonder if we've experimented with any other measures. Berea College, for example, is a small liberal arts school in Kentucky who's used their wealth to take the radical step of eliminating tuition for students.
Berea College is a tuition-free institution. We were founded in 1855, and we haven't charged tuition for our students since 1892. And the way that works is basically we fund our tuition mostly through our endowment. In 1920, our Board of Trustees decided that they would take all of our unrestricted bequests and place those into our endowment. Now that endowment has grown to where it can sustain supporting the majority of the money we need to run the college and pay for the tuition of all of our students.
Berea is able to pull this off by dedicating a full 5% of their endowment return each year towards tuition, being extremely frugal with other operating costs, and keeping their student body small. Tuition is also supported by federal grants and about $5 million annually in donations. And Berea's roughly $1 billion endowment is a pretty common size for a highly ranked liberal arts college. They just spend a ton of money covering tuition, so they can't afford dorms that look like Hogwarts. But it's hard to look at the way Berea spends money and not wonder if the Ivies of the world could be doing more. Like, teach more students? I don't know.
The other thing that's out there is the opportunity to expand, so like franchise. And in a way, the University of California system has done this. Instead of just having Cal, we now have UCLA and Irvine and San Diego and UCSF, and all of those have really exceptional programs. And I don't know if we could have like a Harvard Western Mass and Harvard Maine.
I don't want that many pretentious kids around the U.S. While endowments for wealthy schools have grown tenfold and the price of attending those schools has multiplied, the number of students that these schools serve has basically stayed the same. But one population that has grown expediently on elite college campuses over the past few decades has been big money guys on the boards of trustees.
There are a lot of private equity, venture capital, real estate folks on those boards who happen to have, private equity firms that the endowment then puts money in. which is very convenient and not illegal. It's not wrong for them to do it. They just close it. So it's, if it's seen as a conflict of interest, it's out there in the public. No one's hiding it, but they still do it.
Going back to our rootin' tootin' cowboy David Swenson for a moment, the Yale model inspired colleges to be involved in private financing in more ways than one. In 1989, amongst the wealthiest universities, only 17% of board members were financiers. That number jumped to over 30%, where it's stayed since 2014. And a bunch of those folks come from private equity and hedge funds. The same investment funds who rely on endowment capital to fund their operation and pay out their huge fees. So we know endowments serve to make prestigious schools like these even more prestigious. We know endowments are one of the biggest source of funding for high-performing investment funds like hedge funds and private equity. But will the richest schools in the world ever find a way to use the immense wealth at their disposal to make all of this less expensive? Brian? No more sitting in the back of class. If universities were to start spending their endowments broadly, where would you like to see that allocated?
On affordability. We know that people who graduate from the most selective universities tend to do very well professionally. And we also know that it's exceedingly difficult to get into one of those places unless you're very rich.
Maybe even more optimistically, could these elite universities ever figure out how to share some of their immense wealth with these less prestigious schools who don't have these kinds of ball-dropping endowments and likely never will?
A lot of historically Black colleges, for instance, have very small endowments for a number of reasons, including that historically the students who went there came from backgrounds of more modest means and, had to borrow money to attend college. So when they get out of school, they're not putting money into their bank accounts, they're repaying loans. And you have this intergenerational wealth issue. Graduates of these schools, even if they're very successful, often can't afford to give millions back to their institution. The endowments stay small and it feeds on itself.
Elite colleges stay elite because their financial infrastructure is made to uphold and exponentially grow wealth pretty much forever. But the system is designed to do more than just prepare for the future. It's designed to build prestige. But good Lord, how much money does one need to be prestigious? I feel like after the 10 billion mark, we all get the point. Maybe these rich schools could try a little harder to make the system more affordable and serve more people across the board, which is something we clearly need. Like instead of building a new DJ training center, looking at you, NYU, perhaps the endowment stockpile could be spread amongst the schools that need it. How do you like them apples? For good work. Shabooyah, 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 Shaboo, yeah.